Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, May 15th, 2020, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the most horrific 2020 electoral map that I could conjure for this election. So, based off of all realistic scenarios, I know I have discussed the possibility of an electoral college tie in the past. And realistically, this would be one of the worst possible things that could happen for our country. In this scenario, if there is a 269 to 269 tie, the Senate will decide who the next vice president is, the incoming Senate, and the incoming House of Representatives will decide the way that the presidency goes. But the catch is, in that House vote, only one vote per state, which means the state of Delaware has the same voting power as Texas, and Texas has the same voting power as New York, and New York as California, and it just goes on. Alaska is just as represented as California in this presidential election map. So let's talk about how we get there. Well, first of all, if we talk about all of the safe Republican states, that puts Donald Trump at a start of around Actually, I'm not going to do margins. I'm just going to do the map because I'm not going to focus too much on that. That's not the main purpose of this video. But when you start characterizing in all of the states that we know are probably going to vote a certain way, and then you take out most of the swing states, you know, it becomes a lot more realistic for the possibility of an electoral college tie. Placing this back in the 2016 presidential electoral map, let's say Donald Trump is able to carry, every single state that he carried in 2016. We're going to change some of these, obviously, because Donald Trump did win in 2016. But, in this scenario, based off the 2016 map, in order for us to reach an electoral college tie, not many things would have to change. We're talking about minimal state flips. And, realistically, it is very possible that, Joe Biden wins in Michigan. He wins in Pennsylvania and doesn't win in Wisconsin. That is a realistic scenario. And if somehow, Joe Biden is able to carry Maine's 2nd district, that officially makes it a 269 to 269 tie. Now, this isn't the only way for this electoral college tie to be reached. There's other possibilities, but realistically, this is the most likely scenario. A possibility where Joe Biden picks a female from the Northeast that can do very well as his VP nominee, for example, Elizabeth Warren, and she's able to convince a number of previously Obama voters that switched to Trump in 2016 in Maine, in New Hampshire, to move back into the Biden column. And then that leads with Joe Biden winning Maine's 2nd district. And it isn't going to be difficult for Joe Biden to win Pennsylvania and Michigan. At this point, it's the Democratic Party's race to lose on the presidential level. But the state of Wisconsin is by far more conservative than the other two, and it has consistently outperformed for Republicans compared to both Pennsylvania and Michigan. In terms of 2016's margin as well, Wisconsin was the largest by percentage. Obviously, the two other states were more populous, but Wisconsin actually gave Donald Trump, a higher share or a higher difference of voters than the state of Michigan and rivaled Pennsylvania, even though Wisconsin, out of all three of them, had the largest margin of victory for Donald Trump. So in this scenario, Donald Trump is not reelected and Joe Biden is not elected president. So again, let's keep talking about what moves on past here. In this scenario, we see pretty much the country divided way worse than it was in 2016. But now we have to start taking a look at the United States House of Representatives. Let's take a look at the current House forecast. Well, considering that it is going to be impacted by the incoming House of Representatives, you'd think based off this political forecast that the Democratic Party would have the presidency in the bag. I mean, realistically, the Democrats are going to win the House of Representatives in 2020. But at the end of the day, that's not how this is decided. So let's take a look at the current House of Representatives. Essentially, the way that this is decided is they take all of these states and they give them one vote. And the entire congressional delegation gets to vote in terms of which candidate they support, and that candidate with more votes in the state itself will end up winning it. So, if you look at the states themselves, sure, some states may be Democratic, but at the end of the day, they aren't. Some of the states that may have voted for Joe Biden on the presidential level may not vote for him in the House of Representatives level. And I'll just take a look at the presidential map and just apply it to that. So let's say every state gets one vote. We'll keep the electoral margins just in here so you can see it on a nationwide level. But we know pretty much all of the single or sole representative states are going to go a certain way. We know that there's a pretty much large majority, Texas included, of a majority of Democratic or Republican representatives in a number of these states. Pretty much you can go up across the Northeast and fill in the map. It looks very similar to what you might see on the presidential level. D.C. does not get a vote in this at all. Alaska, and then Hawaii, New Mexico, California, Oregon, Washington. So when you look at this electoral map, this looks very similar to pretty much the 2020 electoral map. But when you look at the number of districts and you look at the number of Democrats versus Republicans in districts, this is pretty much what's going to be deciding the presidency. At the end of the day, both parties do heavily gerrymander. It's not sole for just the Democrats or the Republicans. At the end of the day, both political parties do this. And when you look at the 2018 House elections, the Democrats did very well in certain states. For example, North Carolina. This state currently, before the incoming House representatives, or even after, will have more Republican representatives than Democrats, despite the state voting pretty much a tie in the 2018 midterm elections. The Republicans sent 10 representatives to the United States House, and the Democrats sent merely 3, despite having a 50-50 tie in the House vote. So at the end of the day, these districts should be a very accurate representation of the population. And, my home state is Maryland. I know gerrymandering better than most people, considering the fact that every single district in Maryland is gerrymandered. It's not just a Republican or Democratic issue, but that brings up this presidential issue that since the redistricting will not occur until after this election, that tie scenario is somewhat realistic. It's within the top, 10 possibilities for the outcome of the election. It sends it over into the United States House of Representatives. And right now, the Republicans currently have 26 House Representatives votes right now based off of congressional delegation. Interesting that states like Iowa and Minnesota go to the Democrats. But if you look around, there's ties in Michigan and Pennsylvania. There's more Republicans in Ohio. There's more Democrats in Virginia. But as you start to fill in the map, you will start to see that, at the end of the day, based off of the overall delegation, Donald Trump will likely win the presidency just based off the fact that every single state has been now narrowed down to one vote. Again, California is weighted just as much as Montana. But when you move over to the United States Senate, every single senator gets a vote. And when that happens, well, we're going to be in for a very long ride if this is the outcome. But I really hope, for literally the sake of our country, that there is no tie in the United States presidential election, because if that happens, I can only imagine the amount of outrage from both sides about how this process will go down, because it's more likely than not that the Democratic Party will make gains in the Senate. If they end up winning the United States Senate, you can almost bet that they will send in a vice president that is from the Democratic ticket. I don't know who the VP nominee is going to be yet, but you can almost guarantee they will send them. When you look at the current Senate, it's 53 to 47. So it isn't unrealistic for the Democrats to make gains. Right now, it looks like they're going to carry Arizona's Arizona's Senate race. It's a possibility they win in Maine. It's a possibility they win in North Carolina. It's a poll out today that shows the Republican only ahead by a mere 1% and the Democratic governor ahead by 15% in his race. When you look around the country, it is possible for the Democrats to win back the United States Senate this year. And based off of that tie scenario, this would just completely rewrite history. We would have Donald Trump be elected president. I can almost be 100% sure of that, regardless of how the 2020 House elections end up. The Republicans are probably going to end up not gaining seats, but probably just holding on to the same amount. So it probably won't change much. I don't really see Democrats gaining too much, if at all, in the United States House in the 2020 elections. But for the Senate, this has a real possibility of going to the Democratic Party. And it would just be an absolute insane and crazy scenario if there was no defined winner by mid-December. And this went on past the inaugurations for a number of these representatives and senators. And as they enter into office, it's just going to be a very interesting and very sad, honestly, scenario. Because when you look at the presidential electoral map, at the end of the day, nobody really expects it to be super close for either side. Usually, if you're supporting one candidate, you expect either a a Democratic landslide or a Republican landslide, just because you may be more inclined to support that candidate in that scenario. It honestly doesn't matter. At the end of the day, this race is going to be close. It doesn't really matter what the mainstream media says about it. I can honestly tell you it's going to be close. But the fact that this scenario is even remotely likely, which it is, if you look, the chances of Donald Trump carrying the Rust Belt aren't as high as Joe Biden carrying it, but the chances of him winning in Wisconsin are way higher than him winning in Michigan or Pennsylvania. And, it is possible that Joe Biden does pick Elizabeth Warren or another female VP that could do very well in the Northeast for Joe Biden. And it is possible that Maine's 2nd district does flip. So when you look at this map, it is a real possibility that this does end up being our electoral map. And if this is the scenario, goes to the House, goes to the Senate, but it would be absolutely insane and honestly horrific for the American people, because we would be divided for the next 4 years past 2020, just because of how insane and, frankly, though it's outlined in the Constitution, it will be perceived as extremely undemocratic for the country. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all tomorrow.